Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us this morning. Let's begin with a prayer. Divine Mother, Heavenly Father, friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda, we bow to you all with love and gratitude for the divine teachings of self-realization. Open our hearts to receive your living presence. Open our minds to your divine wisdom, and make us channels of your joy and light into this world. In all that we do, may we behold thy loving presence. We are forever thine. Be thou ours. Om, peace. Amen. Good morning once again to you all. My name is Badri, and together with Lauren, I serve as the co-director of our Ananda Portland here Sangha and Temple. And we're very delighted to have with us Asha Nayaswami. Thank you for being with us, Asha, for our special workshop this morning entitled Self-Realization, the Fearless Heart. So we plucked this title out of the air, and we're going to see what Asha can cook up for us. It's a little game we're playing. So before a little bit more brief introduction for Asha, I believe we'll have some music to share with you all. So I'll invite Cindy up.
Two songs by Swami Kriyananda, and I'll invite the choir to come up for the second song, but not the first song. This first song is Dare to Be Different. It's from Mystic Harp 2, which is the same as that instrumental we played last night for those who are here. It's on the same CD. Need this a little lower. Dare to be different, dare to be free, dare to roam far like wind on the sea, fly like a gull, soar high on the air, be strong in your courage when others despair. Never in anger, never in haste, go without pride, be never abased. Freedom is yours if freedom you'll give. To all give it freely, in freedom you'll live. Mountains that stand up tall to the sky tell us no dreaming is ever too high. Dare to climb boldly, brave that high peak. You'll never know failure if bravely you seek. Sing with me. Dare to be different, dare to be free, dare to roam far like wind on the sea, fly like a gull, soar high on the air, be strong in your courage when others despair. Be strong in your courage when others despair. Now, I think all the choir members cherish these.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you to the singers. The music always brings a wonderful dimension to what we have to share together. I'll just briefly say that, again, we're delighted to have not only Asha, but all of you with us this morning and throughout this weekend. We have a number of special events going on. And this is a very special workshop, as I said, Self-Realization, the Fearless Heart. But what it's really about is coming together and sharing our hearts and sharing these divine teachings. And although Asha has been traveling all over the world, including throughout Europe and South America and to Africa and East Asia, she deigned to come just a few miles north from her home in California. As she mentioned the other night, domestically, word is getting out that if you invite her to come, she'll actually come to visit you. So we managed to capture her for a weekend of fun up here. And that's really, as I said, what it's about. It's just being together in the spirit of fun, which means divine joy, which is Ananda. So as we share these wonderful teachings from Yogananda and Kriyananda, which Asha has been doing for many, many years faithfully in this ray, it's really about just being together in the heart and sharing this divine wisdom. So thank you and welcome to Asha.
I think I will actually just take it out. Stuck. Am I in right? Sever the connection.
I did unplug it yesterday, so let's just make sure.
Let's try that again.
Okay, how's that? There we go. It's it's very discouraging to talk for 2 hours and find out I could never be heard. Everything, no pressure on the sound crew, but everything depends on you. Yeah. I am very happy to be in this temple. I've been here before, but I mean a number of times, but not for a long while. I was given the assignment by Swami Kriyananda, the founder of Ananda, who was my personal. I had 45 years of close association with him. And in the last year of his life, which was, he died in 2013, but in June of 2012, he said to me, at his request, I'd been living for decades in the Silicon Valley in California. Swami asked us to move there at the late 80s. He was saying that these teachings of Yogananda are ideally suited for this age, and the Silicon Valley is a place where many things happen that end up guiding the whole planet, especially in the late 80s when all of this was just getting started. And his assignment was actually very simple. He said, I would like you to raise the awareness of Yogananda's teachings above the horizon line, is how he put it. So when people begin to awaken spiritually and they look around, they'll see it. Because that's really, you can't really do more than that. You can't force people to want something that they don't want. Especially something as profound and important as our own spiritual awakening. It can't be compelled. In my house, I have a couple of small apple trees. Not in the house, but outside the house. They're small, but not that small. Okay. And they're entirely God's project. I have no actual capacity to help them, except every so often I go on and cheer them on in their little project. So periodically, this season especially, we'll pull apples off, and you're sitting there with this miracle of planet Earth. And one really understands how people who lived closer to the earth would begin to see everything about nature as divine. It's self-evident. I mean, we're so now, you in Oregon a little less than we are in California, but we're so separated from the natural forces. So, but when you live close to the natural world, your reverence for it is spontaneous. Because you see that life itself is sustained by whatever that power is that's moving through, that turns a little seed into an apple tree. And then many people can live from what is made there. So I've just, speaking of this, I would see that little seed, and literally at the same time could look out the window and see the tree. And you would realize that inside that tiny little seed, there is this potential, this extraordinary potential that the seed bears no relationship visually to the tree. It's so much smaller, it looks so different, but inherent in that is this almost literally unimaginable potential. But we also have to understand that no amount of demand is going to just turn that seed into an apple tree. I can sit there, I can scold it, I can punish it, I can exhort it, I can give it affirmations, and it has the potential, but it can't get there except from the power that's within it, gradually awakening and expanding. And it's a step-by-step journey, and there's no part of it that can be skipped. You know, if the apple seed becomes a little tiny thing like this and then grows another foot, and then it gets bored. This is such a long process, you know? It's just here I am, and I'm skinny, and nobody likes me, and I'm vulnerable, all these different things. I want to be a big tree, but it can't, because every single stage between a seed and a tree has to be gone through. Now, here's another interesting piece about that. One of the fascinating aspects of the teachings that Yogananda brought through Autobiography of a Yogi and his interpretation of the teachings of Jesus and the extraordinary example of Babaji, as described in Autobiography, an ever-living, deathless master that even now lives in the Himalayas. You know, it was very interesting because of the way the internet collates information. One of my friends we were trying to figure out how to market what we're doing, basically. Autobiography of a Yogi has been read by millions of people. And interesting, more people remember Babaji than they remember anyone else in the book, because Babaji is so exciting. He's transcended death. He's still living up there in his little dhoti and his bare chest, you know, up in the Himalayas. He magically moves from place to place just by the power of thought. And anyone who says the name of Babaji with reverence will attract an instant blessing. All of these things. Well, I just want to show you how funny the mind is as on the process of the seed becoming the apple tree. So I have all these pictures of Babaji in my mind. There's a lot of backstory here. In 2004, Swami Kriyananda, who at that age was probably in his late 70s, he decided that the time had come for him to start a work for Yogananda for Ananda in India. So he moved to India in 2004, essentially is when he started. And he'd lived in India when he was in his early 30s, and he had been a tremendous success. He was very popular there. Thousands of people came to see him, and he traveled all over the country speaking. Now he's an old man, his health is not good. He couldn't figure out how he was ever going to do it. As he put it, India almost killed me when I was 30. It will certainly kill me when I'm in my 70s. Now, of course, all those years ago, it was much less highly developed. In the late 80s, India moved away from Gandhi's isolationism, opened itself to foreign corporations, and the rest is history. It just became a whole different world. So among the things that Swami discovered in 2004 was that there were these national television stations where the entire content was spiritual. So he could sit in his living room and do these television shows and literally talk to millions of people. So he started doing this. He recorded enough television shows to be shown every day, twice a day on these national, international channels. So all of this is going on. He's trying to get this work going in India. It's very difficult. He's doing a lot of tapasya in his own physical body. Then this young man that Swami had never met before comes to speak to him because this young man has a message for Swami Kriyananda. And the man tells the story that he was climbing out in the mountains where he liked to go by himself. He encountered a sadhu, and that sadhu was Babaji. And Babaji starts talking to him about many things, and he also says, I want you to take a message to Swami Kriyananda. Now, I have no way of evaluating the truth of things like this, but Swami shared the story with us, and that to me says that he must have felt it was true. So the young man brings to Swamiji this message from Babaji that says, I'm very pleased with what you're doing. You know, your sacrifice, your commitment to come to India, to bring Master's teachings back to the land of his birth. And I'm especially pleased about the television shows. Now, I think you're doing exactly what I'm doing. I think, Babaji knows about television? You know, like my tiny little brain has him up in the Himalayas in a cave, and how would he know about television? You know, like, the whole point of this is very simple. We're so accustomed to our own way of doing things that we don't even know that it's just my own way of doing things. You know, it becomes the way things are. And that's why this whole project of self-realization is so complicated. And at the same time, it's so simple. The apple seed does not have a highly developed, brain, but there's something in it that knows what it's supposed to do. And all you have to do is just not interfere. If you just give it its own natural conditions, it will find a way to fulfill its own destiny. And so all of us, no matter what it may look like to us, we are all on the pathway to fulfill our own destiny, and we are being compelled, not merely guided, we are being compelled by our own inner nature to go through every single step that we have to go through. And our little brains kind of just run around in little circles, just pretending. Swami Kriyananda just told a fun story about he took a family from Europe to Disneyland because Disneyland is so famous to everyone, and the father of the family was there, and he was used to being in charge of the family, but he'd never been to Disneyland before. And one of the rides, I haven't been there myself in decades, so I don't know, but one of the rides at one time was these little rowboats. Things are probably much more sensationalized since then, but these little boats, and you get in the little boats and you're on the lagoon and you have a little steering wheel and it feels very much like you're driving your own boat. And Swami said he was on one boat and this father was on the other boat with some of his children, and they were going like this, and Swami sort of chatting across the water, but the man just can't give Swami any attention because he's so busy driving the boat, and he's got his children in the boat. He has to protect his children. And he doesn't realize, of course, the boat's on a track. It's not bumper boats out there, It's not a free-for-all. It's going where it's trying to go. But the steering wheel moves a little bit. So, thank you. So you have the impression that you're actually doing something, and we fall for it. We're suckers for the idea that we actually have power here. But and we do. Don't misunderstand me, because unlike the apple seed, we have the free will to make lots of choices. And so, even though we could go just in a straight line, we get extremely infatuated with all these different things that happen. Now, here's another aspect of these masters, which is really something interesting, that this is how Yogananda helped progress our understanding, because Jesus is in the middle of this altar. It's so funny. I've been on this path for, since I was 22, which is, let's just say it was a while ago. And I also was involved in helping to found 2 Ananda communities. The first, Ananda Village, which was the very first community where I went to live in 1971. We just moved out into the forest. This was a time when my karmic tribe, so to speak, we were dropping out of everything. And so to go off into the forest like we did was, it was a movement. Actually, what Swamiji said to us once was, many of us, I'll see how far, I'll digress, why not? I'll way digress on this one. Swamiji talked once about, basically in the United States, but on the whole planet, but especially in this country, he said there are 4 karmic groups that for incarnations have been working on certain things, learning certain lessons in certain ways. And he spoke of the 4 karmic groups. One of them is old Atlanteans, and the whole story about Atlantis. One of the things that Yogananda speaks about is what's called the yugas, which is higher and lower ages of awareness on this planet, just this one planet. And he speaks of this marvelous 24,000-year cycle in which consciousness goes up and gets more and more refined, then it reaches an apex, and then it gradually declines. This is an astronomical fact, not astrology, but astronomy, because our solar system is moving closer and then farther away. These are all scientific facts. You don't have to believe me because I'm very unconvincing about these, but this is actually science. That it moves closer, and that there's this tremendous energy force from the center of the galaxy. The closer we come to the center, the more enlightened the planet is. And we are in an ascending cycle now. Atlantis was at the apex, so Atlantis goes toward the apex, crosses the apex, and then begins to decline. This is how it works. So at that time, what happened was that they became so technologically advanced that their technology at first was helpful, and then it became so distorted that it gradually created such an imbalance that the whole continent sank. Right. So the Atlanteans are back because we're in another ascending cycle, which is also very depressing because it tells you how long it takes us to get out. And it's not merely that the same souls are back, but the same vibration is back because we're in the rising age again. So people are thinking that technology is going to be our saving grace. You know, now everybody's so excited about AI, about artificial intelligence. Although I loved what someone read. He said, I don't want artificial intelligence to do art and music. I want it to do the laundry and clean the house so that I can do art and music. But you see how confused it gets. So the Atlanteans, who helped our society tremendously because technology gets more and more subtle forms of energy. It awakens us, it makes things possible, it unites the planet, it gradually, first it creates, and then it gradually will dissolve war and violence because we will become one people. Right now it's just making war and violence worse, but this is how these things work. But the Atlanteans became so divorced from the natural way to live that everything got out of balance. Sound familiar? Okay, so they're back, and they're doing it again. And some of them are doing good, and some of them are not. And we're on that cycle. Then you have the people from the Romans who brought their society down with vast overindulgence in sensuality and just all that hedonism and all that what you could do to stimulate the pleasure. And that brought that society down, and those people are back. And those people are in charge of entertainment and to a large extent politics, right? Kind of a mess. Okay, that's them. And then over here, we have two kinds of Indians. We have those who are Oriental, especially India by nature, who've been in the Himalayas learning these teachings for ages, and many of these traditionally Indian souls are being born in the West. And by contrast, many traditionally Western souls are being born in the East, because it's time to bring the world together. And that's a lot of us. I was handed a book by Vivekananda when I was 18 years old, and there was nothing in my life, nothing, zero, that would have made me attuned to that. I opened it up, and that was it. It took me about a minute to realize this is what I'd been looking for because of past lives. Then the other Indians are the Native Americans. And the way Swami put it to us, you know, our land was taken from us, so we were born white and rich and bought it back. And that's the group coming back to out there in the forest with Swami Kriyananda starting this community. We were very in tune with the natural world. Those are all the ecology movement is all those reborn Native Americans, you know, just trying to bring back this balance. We all have a job. We're all an apple seed trying to become an apple tree, and we are compelled by these forces within us to move in these directions. So we're out there just totally divorced from everything, just living this idyllic life with no money and no conveniences. And most of us were in our 20s, and we had most were unmarried, no children. Everything was just, it was heaven on earth, honestly. I said to Swamiji once, I asked him about what makes us reincarnate. He said, longing and regret, which is, now that's a long seminar all by itself. Okay, and we're coming to it because we're talking about self-realization and we're talking about fear. We long for things either that we never got and always wanted, and we want to be reborn to try again, or we had something that we love so much we want to repeat it. But we long for something. I'm standing here, I am incomplete. I long for something. And the other, of course, is regret, which is if only. If only. If only I hadn't, if only I had. Things, those vibrations register in the chakra system. The chakra system is the energy pattern within us, the subtle energy pattern within us that compels us. That's what compels us. This is an energy universe. It looks physical, but science also that, what is it, me? I'm just holding it. What's happening? Am I okay? All right. Science also tells us that this world is not physical. I mean, it sure seems physical to me, but it's actually being moved as energy. So all of our experiences, and this is, there's a few things that answer all questions, or at least it's the template that will allow us to answer. Are you going to give me another option?
Yeah, try another mic.
Okay. Okay. So far. Keep trying. Do we have it now? Okay. I was starting to say there's a few things that are the template, which is, I started with one, the yugas, what's going on in the external world right now. The other is what's going on in the internal world, which is the chakra system, which is how our actual trajectory in life and our consciousness is what the pattern is, what creates it and how we can affect it. then that energy pattern is also the explanation for what karma is. Karma is cause and effect, simply cause and effect as it relates to human life. What causes what? And then reincarnation. Reincarnation is helpful because you can't figure it out in one lifetime. You know, at the point I'm standing at this end, when I first came to the spiritual path, which, I was 19. I got serious when I met Swami. Well, no, I got direction when I met Swami at 22. I thought it would take me about 5 years. Do not ask me where I got that number. I just, my little brain just created it. I figured, things would be pretty settled in 5 years. Suffice to say, they weren't. The details are too gory, but that was basically it. It was I just made it up. But as one perseveres, one begins to realize how complex how complex the karma is, how complex is the pattern in the chakras, that we're working our way through. So now let me find out where I was and what I wanted to say. Oh, I know what it was. One of the clarifications, a profound clarification that Yogananda brought to the Western idea of spirituality is this idea that self-realization, that even the great masters are not fundamentally different from us, that they attained self-realization. Swami Kriyananda would tell this story of Yogananda was urging upon a disciple some challenging task, and the disciple was lamenting how difficult it was and how can I do it, and then the disciple said to Master, well, you can do it, you're a master. It's easy for you, it's hard for me. And then Yogananda thundered in response, and what do you think made me a master? He said, it was by doing, by affirming strength, not weakness. But he wasn't just saying, I stand at the top of the mountain like this. He said, what do you think made me a master? That the masters started out as an apple seed, just like the rest of us. How long ago that was, when they became self-realized? Christianity was so confused because they took reincarnation out of the Bible, and so Jesus just ended up being this anomaly. And we wanted, out of devotion, out of appropriate devotion for him, to try to express how extraordinary he was and what a powerful effect he had. So what we did was I say we because I think, what I was actually thinking about is, out of good motive, often we make bad decisions. So I can see myself back there in the early days of Christianity making some bad decisions that brought us to this point. What can I say? We wanted to try to express in words how fabulous Jesus was, so we made him more and more singular. But you see, the more singular he became, the more his achievement became completely separated from our potential. And the Jews and the Christians did exactly the same thing. The Jews decided that there's going to be one Messiah who hasn't yet arrived, and so they have a problem there, and so everybody else is just waiting. And the Christians have an issue because Jesus was a singleton, and by his grace he will free us, and that is a true teaching. But we don't understand the process. So Yogananda brings in the process of self-realization. And even more than that, they explain to us that they themselves can speak with authority because they've been through it. There's, Swami quoted Yogananda as saying that Yogananda remembered his own individuality. And the word for that in Sanskrit is jiva, J-I-V-A. It's not necessary to have a lot of Sanskrit, but a few words are much better in Sanskrit than English. You might use the word soul in English, but soul is a bit unprecise. Jiva is very precise. Jiva is that unique individuality, which is present from the time we were created, whatever that means or however that happened. We were created and there was individuality. Yogananda said every atom is dowered with individuality. And that individual consciousness is the consistent line through all of our incarnations until we become God realized. And then even though that the bubble merges into the sea, the bubble is still there and can be drawn back out. That's why you can pray to Jesus and he will appear to you. You know, just he will appear. The bubble will come back out of the sea and be Jesus for you again, because the jiva is eternal. So Yogananda said he remembers all the way back to the point when that individuality was the consciousness of a diamond. Now my little brain says, a cut diamond or an uncut diamond? Kind of a dumb question, but you know, your mind can't help. But you also think, a diamond? I have a bangle that, I used to wear all these rings on my hands, but I love them. I look at them longingly. They're not there anymore. I looked like the Pope. I looked like the Pope gone crazy, you know, with all these big, but I used to be able to see my gemstones, and I was friends with them that way. But I was in South Africa, and which is a very tumultuous country even still, and my hostess put her arm around me and said, honey, you better take those rings off, because somebody on the street could knock you over to get them. I thought, oh my God, you know, so I put them away, put them where they don't show. But I had a long relationship with the diamond because it was on my hand and I saw it every day. And more than that, I just want to speak for the fun of it. I had several stones there, and 2 of them I bought from a handful of stones. You know, somebody hands me yellow sapphires. They hand me a handful of yellow sapphires. Honestly, one of those yellow sapphires said, take me home, take me home, take me home. And it was as real as it could be, the same with the emerald. The diamond was even weirder. I mean, I'm talking about, you know, 40 years of accumulation. I'm not a rich person, but these things were important to me. You buy diamonds, you can buy diamonds off of the internet because it's such a regulated business. You just get your criteria like this. I'm trying to buy a diamond off the internet. Somebody had given me the money. It was a huge amount of money for my world, but it was a gift, and so it was important. This is all astrology. We don't have to go into all of it now, but so I'm trying to decide about this diamond. I'm going through the internet looking at diamonds, and it's just hopeless to me. And then one day, I just start again. I'm suddenly on a page that somehow I didn't even know how I got there. There's my diamond. Really, what can I say? And I just, for this huge thing, I just, you know, clicked on the buttons and ordered the diamond. And as soon as it came, it was, oh, honey, there you are, you know, like this. So when Master said he was a diamond, I can understand it. But think about it. I mean, an apple seed to an apple tree is nothing. A diamond to a self-realized master? Just think about all the stages that you have to go through. And then I asked Swami, how long between being a diamond and being a self-realized master? He sort of looked at me, basically with that look that says, and if you knew, what difference would it make? You know, oh, well, now I feel better, you know, like, what am I going to say? And he sort of said, essentially, he thought it was a dumb question. By that point in my life, which was relatively recently, I was comfortable with being dumb. I said, I thought it was very interesting, sir. I would have said, I have 10 more questions on the same subject, but I could see he wasn't open to it. But after a brief pause, he said, all time is short compared to eternity. Isn't that interesting? See, because our little mind has all these pictures, because, you know, it's always now. We have this great sense of time, but where is it? You know, we're always just standing in the now. So we're on this, okay, the 2 parts that I'm supposed to be talking about, self-realization, the fearless heart, okay, which is a very nice title, by the way. What is self-realization? What are we trying to do? We're just trying to become who we're meant to be. Now, bear in mind, who you are right now is also exactly who you were meant to be. One of the great lines from the Bible is when Jesus declares, when he's close to his crucifixion, he prays, Lord, let this cup pass from me. Let this not happen to me, which I love that prayer. I love it for this reason. Jesus had an opinion, right? He really had an opinion. He thought, are you sure? This is like not an ideal plot line that you're laying out here. And it wasn't because he was worried about himself. It was because he'd come to bring joy and freedom to these people, and they were turning on him. He was trying to awaken him, and they were rejecting it. And it was breaking his heart, because he could see all the reincarnations, all the lifetimes of suffering, of longing and regret that they were all going to have to go through. And that's why when he was being crucified, he said, Father, forgive them. He was intervening in their karma at the last moment. They had caused all this tragedy in a certain sense. It wasn't really, but they caused all this drama and all this challenge for so many people. And he knew that wasn't going to be good karma for them, so he was intervening. They don't know what they're doing. They don't understand. Spare them. That was the magnitude of his heart. So he's saying, Lord, let this cup pass from me. And then he says, but thy will, not mine, be done. So we have an opinion. We have to be authentic. But in the end, we have to be humble. What do I know? And he said elsewhere, save me from this hour. But then he adds, but for this hour was I born. Now this is such an incredible, dramatic moment, dramatic story. You hear the music starts rising up, and you see it as the film and all the special effects that are going to happen. And for this hour was I born. Here's the fascinating thing to consider. Each one of us can make that same declaration. Each one of us is equally a jiva, an equal part of divinity. Krishna is not more divine than you or me. Krishna is not more divine than the worst criminal. The difference only is in the way they behave, right? But the worst criminal turning can become a saint merely by changing their point of view. There's no fundamental difference inside of us. And, which is even both more exhilarating and depressing, is that we have been working for incarnations, doing our very best to get right to this point. I mean, think about that. Every single action, every thought, every feeling has been compelled from within us, the apple seed from an apple tree, by the inherent logic and capacity of our own soul to move into that state of reality. I mean, this is, if you can grasp this in its entirety, it's extraordinarily liberating. Because instead of, my being just a mess up who is still here, it's like we're just on a journey. And it doesn't matter with how bored we are being saplings. This is just the necessary stage. And here's the really interesting thing. Thinking of it like this. Each of our journeys is unique in the specifics of what we have to experience. This is the great mystery of creation. I don't understand it, but there it is. All of your faces are different. And I've seen now in so many places in the world, I've seen so many faces, and you know what? Every one of them is different. It's just like we all have this unique energy pattern which vibrates and then manifests in this particular way, and this is who we are. But the delusions, the distance, I mean, just like the apple seed, it goes through certain predictable stages to get to the apple tree. So there are predictable stages of vibration between total delusion and total freedom. And each one of them, if you were going to be a scientist, you could actually probably assign a number to it. I've even seen there's certain people who've made charts who've tried to do this. This vibrates here, this vibrates there. I don't know how accurate their charts are, but their concept is sound, which is given a certain understanding of reality, this is how it would vibrate. And then in my own world, it would manifest as physical illness, athletic prowess, great relationships, terrible tragedies, because it would just be matching that vibration and giving me the next stage that I need in order to progress through it. And it's not merely that Yogananda and Jesus Christ and Babaji in the Himalayas is sympathetic. It's not merely that they look out, it's they look at us and they say, oh yeah, I remember that one. I mean, just think about that. Oh yeah, I remember that. Now, I was back in whatever the year ought to, or whatever it was, and I was in so-and-so, and I remember doing that, because that was what my truth was at that time. So wherever we are, it's not merely that the masters are guiding us, we are literally walking in their footsteps. Wherever we're standing. Oh, this is what it's like to be at this stage. And then when we ask for guidance and advice, I mean, that's how that guidance is so exact. The details are different, but the fundamental shift of consciousness is the same. And they made it, you know. Can you imagine all those apple seeds talking to the apple tree, and the apple tree saying, yeah, son, I remember, you know? How reassuring that would be, isn't it? And this is what we're working with. So self-realization is, first of all, it's the only game in town. No matter what you think you're doing, no matter what any of them think they're doing. I'm not much into politics, but this particular cycle is particularly entertaining. You know, the characters are, who writes the script, you know? It's like sometimes it's just too boring to pay attention to, and I've never considered it to be my world, so to speak. I mean, sometimes it's more polarized, but the point being, the real solutions are consciousness. The first time I went to India in 1986, it was also the first time I'd ever been out of the Western world. It was practically the first time I'd ever been out of the US, but I'd never been into what they called then the developing world, and that was just before India opened to foreign corporations, so the whole economy and culture was very different than it is now. And I remember arriving in the middle of the night, which for some reason you do, and getting on the tourist bus. I was part of a group leading a pilgrimage to a country I'd never been to. But my job was to keep everybody happy, and I knew I could do that on the bus. And I knew a lot about the teachings. So I'm on the bus, though, looking out the window at a place I've never seen, and I realized that those sort of lumps on the sidewalk are people that's where they live, on the sidewalk. It was altogether it was one thing to know it theoretically, it was quite another to look at it, and it was dark, so nothing looked really awful. But I remember thinking deeply that we have all the technology and all the wealth. We could make this planet a heaven on earth. It would take nothing to make it a heaven on earth. But what we lack is the desire to do it. That's all. It's a matter of the human heart. And I appreciated at that point that my life work, which was well underway, which was to teach people to meditate and to help them to understand self-realization, was an intensely political act, because I was determined to transform society, and have been all these years, from the source, not from the effect, but from the actual cause. But in any case, thinking about the politics, and especially enjoying it as just as a play of God, And it occurred to me that some of these characters, on the national stage right now, they get up in the morning and their entire determination is to acquire some position of power and influence. And some of them have more altruistic motives in desiring that power and influence, and some of them don't. I was thinking more of the ones who don't, just thinking, oh my gosh, a whole incarnation, probably many incarnations, where all the energy is to get power and influence. And I thought, oh, thank you, Lord, that at least that's not where I am anymore. God knows I have my delusions, but even just to put myself into that mindset. But you see, all of us are compelled towards something, and we're compelled for very simple reasons. We think it will bring us more happiness, and it will reduce our suffering. And the people who crucified Jesus, they thought they were doing something that was going to be good. Or at least they thought they might lose their job if they didn't cooperate. Something worse would happen if they didn't participate in that. And they were crucifying people kind of as a regular thing. We hold it out that Jesus' crucifixion was unusual, but it wasn't. That was just, talk about a barbarous society. If you think we haven't advanced as a planet, that was just how, the undesirables were gotten rid of, as they were crucified on the public streets, just on the public walkway. At least we don't do that anymore. We're a little more subtle about it. But they did it because they thought it would increase their happiness and reduce their suffering. And the people who are out there trying to get power and influence for selfish reasons, that's why they're doing it. And that's why you're doing everything you're doing. That's why I'm doing everything I'm doing. And so the entire path of self-realization is to understand what actually causes suffering and what actually brings happiness. And now that's not so easy always to discern, but you see how simple that is? Because every decision we make is based on one of those two things. This was Master, when he came to the United States in 1920, he brought a little book with him. He called it The Science of Religion. And he'd taken the entire ancient teaching of India, thousands of years, and he'd brought it down to those 2 points. Even the apple seed, sort of trying to get an apple tree, it's like there's something compelling us, moving us, that makes it impossible. As one of my friends said to me once, it's just not that easy to lie down and die. She said, you lie down at first, and you're just going to give up, and you're just going to lie down and die, and then you get a little hungry. Then you get a little bored. Then you become curious about what your neighbor is doing, that noise you hear, and pretty soon you're up again. Because we're compelled. This is the divine plan. All right, my friends, I would like to take a brief break. Okay, just to give you a chance to stretch and refresh. We'll come back in 10 minutes, okay?
the sea, dissolve in the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. So do thou, my Lord, so do thou, my Lord. Thou and I never apart, thou and I never apart. Wave of the sea, dissolve in the sea. Wave of the sea, dissolve in the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. Make me the sea, oh make me the sea. Make me the sea, oh make me the sea. Wave of the sea, dissolve in the sea. Wave of the sea, dissolve in the sea. I am the bubble, make me 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 the sea.
The simplicity of that chant gives us the whole message of the spiritual path. I am the bubble. I am a part of the great ocean of spirit, but I wish not to live in the smallness of that identity. I want to be part of the great sea. The practice of meditation is simply to separate ourselves, at least for a time, from the prison of that small self-definition, and to allow ourselves to become aware of the fact that the bubble is always floating in the midst of the sea. Concentrate on the simple fact of breathing. A reality that is always with us, but we are seldom paying attention to. Inhalation, exhalation. Divine life force comes into us, and we rest as we exhale in that reality, the bubble floating on the sea. As the breath flows in, you can use the Hong Sau mantra if you know it, or just say simply, I am. As you inhale, I am, I exist, I am. One with spirit as we exhale. I am spirit. I am spirit. Let's spend just a few moments now in that simple practice. Om Shanti. Amen. I want to talk now about fear, because that's the other half of the equation that we're dealing with today. In the Gospel of John, St. John says, "Perfect love casts out all fear." It's a magnificent phrase. And myself, I use the phrase high-strung, but I'm a little high-strung, and I always have been. And the question of fear has gradually, over the years, I've begun to realize how central that is, not only to my own personal psychology, but really to everyone, especially because of the way John put that in the Bible. Because we tend to think that the opposite of fear is like courage or daring or imagination. But he tells us that the opposite of fear is love. So we have to sort of start thinking about just what is the nature of the fear and how to solve it. We have to answer. My friend Haridas, who was also a founding member of Ananda, American with an Indian name like many of us, for the last so many years he's been with his wife living in Bangalore. Long-time devotee. He found autobiography when he was still in high school. He sort of became the mad monk as a teenager, and then came into our community at a very young age. He always had a marvelous sense of humor, has a marvelous sense of humor, and is very clever with the way he defines things. And he came up with an acronym, which is SPY-DOG. And the acronym is Solving Problems in Direction of God. And so he would advocate the practice of SPY-DOG in all circumstances. Of course, what this meant was when we have something that feels uncomfortable to us, in other words, when in some way our consciousness, we don't think of it this way, but our consciousness is vibrating in some way that creates stress or anxiety inside of us. We've picked something to focus on that causes us to feel uncomfortable. We have many ways of easing that discomfort. Very commonly, you feel anxious about something, you'll check your emails again. See if there's a message that'll distract you. And then pretty soon nowadays you start scrolling through it, and then you find cute pictures of babies, and then after that it's cats. Then eventually you go to politics or wherever you tend to go. And you haven't actually done anything to dislodge the fundamental cause of your mental unease, but you have moved sideways and are now distracted from it. In our society at this particular time, because we are moving into a higher age, and in that higher age, there's a vast increase of energy. But we haven't moved far enough into that age so that the values that we're using are still the values from a lower age, from the age we're coming out of. Kali Yuga is where we're coming out of, Dwapara is where we're going. Kali means dark and material, Dwapara is the second age, and it simply is about energy. So we have all this energy going in our world right now, but only some of it is elevated. Much of it is just an increase of what was always there. So just a moment, I have to clear my throat. So now we have become absolute geniuses at distracting ourselves. As my friend Anandi put it once when we were talking about the fact that you go to a public place, and even if you go into the bathroom, they're playing loud music or the radio or something in there. And as Anandi put it, we mustn't, at any cost, we must avoid being alone with our thoughts for even a moment. like this. You're standing at the gas station just putting stuff in the pump, and now there's a video screen. Looking, the only airplane, well, actually I've missed two, but the most recent airplane that I actually missed, I was right at the gate. I was sitting at the gate, but there was this huge video screen. And I just was so tired of just looking at this flickering image that I turned my back and I started doing some work. And when I turned around, the gate was closing. Now, there was an extra little joke on this one. I'd already missed one. I was in Rome on my way to Jerusalem, and I had made a really stupid connection. And I missed the Jerusalem plane, and then I bought this super expensive non-refundable ticket to get me to Jerusalem. Then I sat at the gate and I missed that plane because I had my back to it because the video screen was so obnoxious. And I was actually this watch. I'm wearing this watch, and the watch says that I was in plenty of time. And I just got kind of unhinged by the whole thing. It was the second day of in the same clothes, and that sort of thing, because I had no luggage. I go up to the desk and I said, but look at my watch. He looks at my watch. The battery was dying, but it wasn't dead, but it was dying, and it was slowing the watch down exactly enough for me to miss the plane. At which point I just surrendered and gave up to the whole thing. But anyway, it was all because of the video screen. That was the whole point. Because anywhere you go, and it's not merely that you can see something, but something is trying to make you incredibly restless. So we naturally just move with this restlessness. We have a dis-ease in our consciousness, and we try to distract ourselves from it. Major distractions like alcohol and drugs and television, overeating, oversensuality, you just name it, long, long, long lists. And if you think about it, most of them, there's an aberration, there's a dis-ease in the consciousness. I need to distract myself from that. To take this all the way to the end of life, which is very interesting, Stephen Levine, many years ago, started writing about death. This was when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was just beginning. These things, for some of you, are now just society, but I remember when they started. And Stephen Levine wrote very interestingly about the stages of dying, which is, again, common knowledge now. But he talked about how if a person dies a little bit more slowly, there'll be the period of time where you cease to be able to make your body do what your body has always done. I mean, those of us who are a little bit older are already experiencing that. I can still very easily get down to the floor. I can sit cross-legged on the floor very comfortably. Getting up is a whole different story. I talk to my legs and I remind them that we've been doing this for a long time, and they just say, they just don't. They don't do what they used to do. And comes the point where you can't get out of bed because your body just won't do it anymore. So Stephen talks about this stage, and often in the process of dying, people become very panicky right around that period of time because they feel aberrations in their consciousness, and they're used to being able to doing something physical to ease that stress. And so now they have to just try to solve the problem of consciousness on the level of consciousness. And fortunately, because there's a grace in the end of life, most of the time, that period of agitation will pass, and they'll suddenly realize that, I can shift my consciousness, or the energy just drains and the agitation goes away. So what we need to understand, and this is where Spy Dog comes in, when we feel an agitation in our consciousness, do we solve the problem in direction of God, means upward toward greater awakening? Do we solve it sideways by just distracting ourselves? Or do we solve it by dulling our awareness, by adding in substances or distractions that just make us too dull to feel it anymore? But have we done anything about the fundamental cause? And so all of fear, if you want to think of it like that. Fear is that something has come and it's begun to agitate our consciousness. And of course, there's many other elements as to why and what we fear, but how do we solve that? Do we just face into it and try to solve the problem by shifting consciousness, or what? And this is where perfect love is the solution to everything that we're afraid of. Now, this is not easy. I want you to understand this. I recognize one of the things that happens to us over many incarnations is that we build up impressions in the chakras. I mean, I think all of you have at least some understanding of what the chakras are, but what we're talking about is the life force that runs through the center of the body. You know, when the physical body is developing inside the womb of the mother, one of the first visible things that they somehow can see is that the first part of the embryo, it looks like a matchstick. Yogananda said that conception takes place at the medulla. The sperm and the ovum unite at the medulla. This is apparently the only part of the body that can't be operated on. If you interfere with this is a source of life. This is actually the source also of egoic identification with the body. The jiva starts here and then defines itself as this physical body. And it limits its definition, or this is the starting point for our self-definition. And the first thing that happens is the energy runs the length of the spine, and we have the little matchstick. And the reason for that is when the jiva enters the womb, when the sperm and ovum unite, and it becomes possible to make a physical body. That physical body is formed by the magnetic presence of the consciousness of the jiva and the pattern of energy that exists in the chakras. Because the chakras are just energy. And so when we die and we go into the astral world, the chakras are the astral body, which is they are the blueprint. And then we live in the energy world, and we shift that blueprint a little from the things that we learn. Then we carry that blueprint back into the material world, and we manifest a material body. This building here, that's been here for a long time, that we think of as just existing, somewhere it was an idea in the mind of an architect or whoever it was. They made a blueprint, and then they made the building look like the blueprint. This all happened on the material plane, but it begins with thought and energy, the material plane, and then it manifests. We carry a blueprint for our destiny and for our consciousness. And because it's only energy, that blueprint is always being shifted. But when it comes into the physical body, it magnetizes the form, the gender, and even the choice of what womb you come into, what mother and father you choose. One of my favorite, absolutely delightful statements from Yogananda was, he said, if there is a jiva in the astral world that is ready to be incarnated, and it sees a man and a woman that it wants for its parents, sometimes the jiva will project erotic thoughts into the room to create the opportunity for conception. Just like, whoa, there's so much going on and I know a number of people have come up to me afterwards and said essentially, so that's how I got pregnant. Or some people will say, I knew I would get pregnant that night. You know, because you just knew, because it's a three-way decision. There's not just two of you involved, there's three at that point. But we have the energy pattern, and that energy pattern there's multiple centers, and in every time that let me think how to say this, okay. We commit our energy in certain ways, and once we commit it in that way, it becomes magnetic and it begins to attract other things to it. And over the course of our lives, we have many experiences which cause us to have certain commitments. Let's use something simple. You're a small child, and the neighbor has a really terrifying dog. And it's a big black dog, and it's totally terrifying to you. And every time you see it, even if you're not conscious, you're terrified by that dog. Or let's make it even worse. Let's say in a previous incarnation, let's say you died because a big black dog bit you. So you have in your chakras, you have this fear-based idea about this particular reality. It creates a magnetism like that. And then that magnetism has to be faced and resolved. So you come in, and right next door to you, there's another big black dog. And your magnetism has drawn that experience, not to make it worse, but so that ultimately you can face into it and get past it. But in the meantime, it constantly terrifies you. And everything in us, think how many issues people go through in their lives and how few of them are resolved. Either they're not resolved because circumstances didn't allow it. Somebody you love dies suddenly, and the morning before they died, you had a big argument, and it can't be resolved. Maybe you lost all your money in some bad investment and you die a pauper, and it just never gets resolved. We have this idea that it's all going to just end up finished, but it isn't. It takes many incarnations for these things to happen. So we have all these vibrations in our chakras. I talk about this on my YouTube channel, and there's classes given here. It's well worth really understanding, because it's the key to everything else. But bear in mind, it's just an energy pattern. There's no bankruptcy in your chakras. There's no lover who betrayed you in your chakras. There's no big black dog in your chakras. There is an experience, a vibration of an experience that you interpreted as frightening or unpleasant or unhappiness. You made a decision about that this is going to cause me to suffer, this is going to cause me to be happy, and then that decision is immortalized, or not quite immortalized, but is perpetuated in that pattern of energy. So the question then becomes is, how do we change that pattern of energy? Because that's all fear is. That's all every emotion is. It's just a pattern of energy. See, this is the good news. Because energy can be shifted by other energy. But it's a metaphysical relationship. Think of it as if you're driving on the highway and you're going very fast, and suddenly you realize that your exit is right there and you missed it. You may know where you want to go, but you have momentum in a certain direction. And that momentum has to be turned before you can follow your new direction. So you have to put out as much energy to change the direction as you have committed in this direction. So this is where willpower, this is affirmations, this is all the practices that we do can change it. But the more we solve the problem in direction of God, the more all-pervasive the shift will be. If we merely distract ourselves, we're just putting it off. And that's how we got into this position in the first place. This is the hour for which we were born, which is all the times that we didn't do it, we get to do it again. It's because I was thinking about Haridas. Haridas I say was because I haven't been with him in many years, but he is a master at seeing the positive. At Ananda village, which is where he lived and I lived, and I knew him then, often in the summers it was exceedingly hot, increasingly so, but we had very hot, dry summers there. And Haridas was a bit of a portly lad, He wasn't overweight, but he had a husky body like this. And there was a temple in this building, two adjacent buildings with a foyer in between. There was a temple here and a dining room here, and there were two kinds of chairs. One chair was yellow, I think, and one set of chairs was brown. And there were like 100 chairs, 150 chairs, whatever it was. And one summer day in the afternoon, I found Haridas all by himself, and he was moving. The chairs had been yellow in this room and brown in this room, and now he was shifting it. All the yellow chairs had to go here, all the brown chairs had to go here. And I said, Haridas, what are you doing? And he said, and he sort of patted his tummy, he said, exercising. Like this. He said, but next time the person who wants the chairs moved, they can get the exercise. And he was following his exact right, spy dog. Instead of saying some fool thought that these chairs should be changed and then I'm the one who had to do it, he just looked at it. There was aberration in his consciousness, he was telling me. This was a hot afternoon and he was having to move 300 chairs all by himself. This was not a pleasant exercise. So what do I do about that? So he just found a way to solve it in an upward movement. I mean, there was nothing divine about moving the chairs, but he tried to think, what positive thing is going to happen here? Because otherwise, if you just don't solve it, it just keeps whirling. And then here's the wonderful news. If you don't do it now, you get to do it later. Wow. Is that really what we want? Speaking of Stephen Levine again, he would give these, he would give seminars for people who had terminal diagnoses. And they would come in at the beginning, they would all make a list of everything that they were going to miss out on because their lives were going to end fairly soon. And, some of the people, these were mostly cancer patients, were not necessarily elderly. I'll never get married. I'll never have children. I'll never walk my daughter down the aisle for her wedding. Just everything. I'll never have that beautiful home. I'll never have this career. And of course, it was terribly emotional, and people would be weeping, and they would assume that this was what they needed to face in order to heal. And it wasn't either heal from the illness or heal from the fear and the distress of it. But then after that was finished, a few days later, he would say, let's now make a list about everything you get to avoid facing because your life is going to end. And it turned out in the process that was really the more important list. Because all of that was, what are we afraid about? What do we feel that we can't deal with still? So when I first read that, it was very interesting to me. I was very intrigued by it, and I thought, well, I have lots of complex psychology. Let me try this. So I tried to make a list of all the things that I was going to be able to avoid. And I'll be darned if my philosophy and all my dedication to it didn't just trap me. Because all I could imagine was if I wrote down that I don't have to do it, all I could think of is, well, then I'll just have to do it later. And if later meant in another body at another time when the details were obscure to me and all I had was this energy coming out of my chakras and hitting me upside the head and I didn't even know why, that's not progress. That's just kicking the can down the road, and it's just worse when it comes to you later. My motto now is, when tough things happen to me and I have to face into them, I say, having to face this once is one too many. I don't ever want to face this again. So let's solve this problem in the direction of God. Because this is how the energy in the chakras works. It's a river of energy, just exactly. You have lots of rivers around here. You all know how the rivers flow. The river is like the apple seed becoming the apple tree. It's I am the bubble, make me the sea. It's going to go to the sea, and it just simply will. It'll just head there. But it doesn't necessarily go in a straight line, but it goes with absolute determination. It knows where it's supposed to end up. But there's something else that happens. The flow, all that water that's trying to get to the sea often gets distracted because there's a big rock, there's a bunch of garbage, somebody drove their old car into the river and it just stayed there, a tree fell, something happens. So instead of heading for the river, it just whirls around this problem here, this something that is preventing the energy from flowing. And those are what's called the vrittis. A vritti is a whirlpool, and that's what our energy does. We get a center point of some kind of committed energy of desire or regret or fear or longing, whatever it might be, like that. And then once we have that, a whole lot of the energy that is trying to get to the sea just spins. It just spins and spins and spins, and the stronger that center point, the more it'll spin. The idea that I'm never going to have to face this is one of those center points, isn't it? I have lived for the last almost 40 years now in the same community in Palo Alto. When I came there in 1986, I assumed it would be more or less, I'd be there a few years, we'd do a little bit of good work, then we'd move on. Most of my peers in the context of Ananda have lived in quite a few places. I have lived in 2, 16 years in one, and like 40 years in another, practically. But I just sort of always thought that I would go somewhere else. And a couple of times, Swami Kriyananda started to give another assignment, and it sort of progressed to a certain point, but then it died. It just didn't work out. And finally he said to me, basically, you're never moving, you're never going anywhere. Meaning you'll never have another residence. Eventually he put me on the road, but at that time he said that. My, that was interesting. It was so interesting to me because what happened was I realized that there was a long list of things that I was waiting to be rescued from. I was always just pretending that I'm never going to have to face this because I'm going to be assigned somewhere else. The person that I just really didn't like and I never really wanted to have to learn to appreciate them, the dead spot in the garden where I could never make anything grow, that awful closet that I never wanted to clean up, this part of the job that I just could never face. And I thought to myself, waiting to be rescued, is that really a life plan? Okay. Now, why are we wait to be rescued? Everything comes down to fear. If you really think about it, fear of pain, fear that it's going to be too much effort, fear of failure, fear that I don't have the ability to do it, fear of humiliation, if you have to admit things. Make a long list, but follow it back down. When I was struggling once to make what seemed to me like a very important decision, it was, I thought, and I just kept asking God what he wanted of me. I was on the path. I was very sincere, living at Ananda. I just kept asking God, and God wouldn't answer me, and I was très dramatic in those days. And so, I would plead, and I would ask for an answer, and I couldn't get an answer. And one day, in great, trade drama like this, I went down to, I say down because he lived downhill from me, to the house where Swami Kriyananda was, and I asked to see him, and he was sitting in this comfortable armchair, and there was a hassock, a foot hassock in between, and I was sitting on the floor on the other side of the hassock. I was explaining to him about how much I wanted an answer and how hard it was for me to have an answer, and finally I was just overcome, and I put my head down on the hassock and I began to sob. This was all very real when it was happening. So I finally mastered myself enough to look with my tear-streaked face at Swamiji, and I said, "It's so hard to know what God wants." And then I collapsed again, And Swami was very kind, but he was also very matter-of-fact. He said, "No, it's not." That's all he said. "No, it's not." And then I waited for the rest. And there was no rest. That was it. That was basically the answer. The interview was over. So, somehow I made my escape, and I walked back up the hill to where my little place was. And I was so... irate is not exactly the right word, because I respected him too much to be angry at him. But I was just beside myself. I didn't know what to think. And very, very interestingly, by the time I got to my house, I had invented his response. I had shifted it ever so slightly. I had said, "It's hard to know what God wants." He said, "No, it's not." I changed it to Swamiji saying, it's not hard for me to know, speaking of himself. So by the time I got to my trailer, he had told me that I had a problem and he didn't. And so then I went to my little meditation space to sort of see if we could sort this out. And at first I was repeating Swami's comment with the self-righteous, well, it's hard for me, and blah, blah. And then truth just came back in, and I said, no, honey, you've shifted these words. See, that's what your chakras do to you. There's a little piece of you that wants to be right, that wants to be indulged, that wants to be told that you're okay. And so you just perceive reality just a little different. It doesn't feel like much. But fortunately, the chakra in me that was more sincere overcame the one that wanted to hide. And all of a sudden I realized that's not what he said. He said it's simply not hard. So then my conversation, I was really talking to Swami in my meditation, but he wasn't in the room anymore. I said, well, it's really hard for me to know. Why is it so hard for me if it isn't hard? He said, oh, because you don't want to know. And then my first response is, but I'm so sincere. Of course I want to know. I said, well, then why? And then the voice came so clearly, because you're afraid. That's all. Because you're afraid. Because you're afraid that you'll get an answer that is not the one you want. And ever since then, I've been able, at least eventually, solve problems in direction of God. Why am I so confused? And then the question becomes really simply, what am I afraid of? And on that particular cycle, I just started saying, what am I afraid of? And then, different ideas would come into my head, and you don't stop with the first one. Well, why am I afraid of that? And see, part of the difficulty here is we use the word good and bad a lot. And good for the human that is identified primarily with the limited self, which is the ego starts here. And ego is essential. Ego is our individuality and our willpower and all of that. But ego becomes limited in how it defines itself. It starts with this physical body. And because of the physical body, only a certain number of choices are open to us. And as long as we're defined as that physical body, we feel weak and limited, because we are. That isn't who we really are, and the process of self-realization is simply to understand our self-definition as what it truly is, which is one with infinity. But starting with that small, what am I afraid of? Well, I want this. And the ego is biased. The limited self is biased in favor of ease and pleasure. And our society at this time is deeply devoted to ease and pleasure. As a culture, as a global culture, especially starting in this part of the world, everything is set up for ease and pleasure. That's what our values are. So we think ease and pleasure is good, and challenge and loss and strain is bad. But what does ease and pleasure give us? Oh, it gives us the opportunity to continue just as we are. Isn't that nice? There was a pop psychology man, and someone said, the reward for clinging to your delusions, you know what you get for clinging to your delusions? You get to keep them. Is that really a prize worth striving for? So, what do we really want? And this is a very, very personal question. And you also have to answer it authentically. You can't just answer it. See, the seed does not become an apple tree by going out and getting an apple tree costume and pasting it on his little seed body, and then walks around and says, see, I'm an apple tree, look at me. And many, many, many people think of spirituality as something I can put on, and then other people will see it. I heard recently a very touching, a very sincere abbot of a Franciscan monastery. was lamenting the fact that because the Franciscan monastery is so well established now, young men would come in. I mean, this was from some times past. Some young men would come in and they would look around and see what it was to be a Franciscan, and then would try to become a Franciscan, instead of looking into their own hearts and finding out how they were going to be a Franciscan. And of course, there was nothing the abbot could do about it because it was very well established. But this is a grave mistake, because you can wear the costume all you want. You're still just going to be a tiny little apple seed in the middle of it, unless you have grown it from the inside. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it? What do I really want? But then, of course, we fear challenge, and we fear pain. Swami Kriyananda, in his life, when he was young, he had colitis, and so they didn't give him milk. And as a result, he always had great problems with his teeth for the rest of his life. And he was in Romania, and they didn't have Novocaine when he was a child, and they would have to drill his teeth. And he said that because he would scream, the dentist would not really finish the drilling. He just put a filling on top of cavity. It's horrible. So it went on for his whole life. So Swami would often have dental procedures, and but he decided he didn't like Novocaine because he didn't like anything that lowered his awareness. What drugs do is they interrupt the senses. They allow you to withdraw your consciousness from the senses. Like that. So if you can withdraw your consciousness from the senses by your willpower, then you don't necessarily need the drug in order to do it. So Swami would have all these dental procedures without Novocaine. And then he would tell us all about them. Like, sir, I don't really want to hear this. But he would regale us with, this thing and that thing. And I thought to myself, why does he do this? With Swamiji, I learned what I would call reverse engineering. Instead of saying, why does he do that? I would say, why does he do that? Given what I felt about his consciousness, I would try to understand his motivation. And gradually, this is what I came to feel. All of us are terrified of pain. And by the grace of God, most of us are not in pain most of the time. So we don't really have that many chances where we really go forward and face it. And he was just offering us, a possibility, or he was just talking about the fact you don't have to be afraid. And he said either he would distract himself by working mentally on a book he was writing, or he would say composing music while they were working on his teeth, or he said if the pain was so intense that he couldn't ignore it, he would concentrate on it and just try to go into the heart of it. What is this that I'm really feeling? It's merely a sensation, and at the worst, well, nothing lasts forever. I've had a good life. I can live through a little bit of this. But all of it is solving the problem in direction of God, which is, instead of trying to be rescued from it, shirking away from it, being afraid of it, we say, well, how can I shift myself in order to, and even if we're not successful, we just ask the question, why am I afraid? What am I afraid of? And we have to say, I never went to the dentist without Novocaine. I tried it once, and it was just so unbearable that I never even considered it again. I just put it aside for another lifetime, But the principle is there. So one begins to train oneself. Why am I so afraid? And ask that question. And when in that moment after Swamiji, what am I afraid of? And it just became instantly obvious to me. I knew exactly what God wanted me to do, but I didn't want it to happen. How long, I'm embarrassed how long it took me. It was so obvious that things were going to turn out in a certain way, and that was going to be that. But I wanted ease and pleasure, and this was going to be sacrifice and struggle. But then you have to ask this other question, and this is, fear is about suffering. It's just about suffering. So you have to ask yourself about suffering. I think I mentioned this somewhat last night also, for those of you who were here, but this also was my my experiences of traveling to India, which I did over a period of about 20 years, maybe 12 times or so, not quite every year. I helped lead these groups to India. And it was almost always Americans, and it was almost always Americans who'd never been into a developing country. So we were seeing and experiencing things that were not common to our experience for most of us. I'm in the Grand Hotel in Calcutta, which indeed was grand. At that time, there was no sort of middle tier of hotels. There was very uncomfortable to American hotels and five-star hotels. I developed what is really my greatest attachment to the material world, which is a love for luxury hotels. But in any case, living in the Grand Hotel of Calcutta for like 5 days, I could look outside my window down at the sidewalk and watch several families that lived on the sidewalk. You know, and they just had their life right there. I'm in this incredibly luxurious place, and they're living on the sidewalk. And in the course of taking people through India, and my job was generally to help people have a good trip and to help them work out whatever was interrupting that trip, I began to watch how differently people responded to other people's suffering. And some people on the trip were just so at ease. They could just, interact with the beggars or the merchants or the children or whatever it was. They could just be so comfortable. Others were absolutely panicked. I mean, to the point where sometimes they would be so panicked when we go out that we'd have to surround them with a little guard because they just couldn't deal with it. I began to ask myself, what is the unifying link here? This was my conclusion. People who were still rebelling against the idea of suffering themselves found it unbearable to see it in others because it reminded them of what they themselves were afraid of. And those who had come to understand that maybe I wouldn't seek this out, but if suffering, challenge, hardship, pain comes to me, I understand that it has a higher purpose and it has the potential to give me something that I really do want. I may not want this experience, but I want the transcendence that this experience is going to give to me. And then if we're very honest and enough time passes and we have enough awful experiences, we have to start admitting the fact that I could never have learned it except through that. So now then we come to the question of karma, which is also very hard to understand. But if you see people who are suffering and there is anywhere in your consciousness that you believe that there is a divine mother who is guiding this world, and that this is a necessary experience for these souls to become free, why would you not cheer them on? Why would you become panicked because they have lessons to learn? What are we afraid of? We're afraid, well, if suffering has to happen, then it might happen to me. And so suffering is bad, ease and pleasure is good. But the point is, you see, what we really want is we want to live by what's true. Because reality always wins. Type that, tattoo that on your wrist. Reality always wins. And we can just say as many things as we want about how it's supposed to be. We're children, and we don't have any big picture here. Swamiji was one of the reasons he was so helpful, is he could see the lives before and he could see the lives in the future. This is my belief. So he would see this experience in the context of what we were working out from the past and what we were creating for the future. Whereas we see it just right here. I don't want it to happen. This is just simply not what I want. Little children are extremely good at declaring reality. They have a perspective, and they have their full consciousness and their full will, and they just know what they know, and they know it's right. Mommy, from now on, I want nothing but chocolate cake for breakfast. I'm done with eggs, no more cereal, chocolate cake for breakfast. Mommy says,
honey, you won't grow up big and strong if you have nothing but chocolate cake for breakfast. The child says, yes, I will. Based on what? Absolutely nothing, except that I want it to be true. So how often in our own lives is our determination about what's right based on anything except I want it to be true? You see, it takes a great deal. Self-realization is not for sissies. It really isn't, because it has to be a courageous willingness to look right at what is. And the only way to be able to do that is if you have an inner relationship with the divine power, with the loving divine power. That's why Master talked all the time about Divine Mother. You know, Jesus actually talked about Divine Mother too, but he was there trying to persuade the Jews to think of God not as a harsh judge, but as a loving father. He couldn't move them all the way to the mother, but he could move them from the harsh judge to the father. That didn't mean that he didn't understand the Divine Mother. It's just it wasn't time. He was moving things. Yogananda could come because now we're all comfortable with the Father, and he says, oh, by the way, there's a mother too. But Jesus talked about it perfectly, and these are not like, there's no heavenly mother, you know, there's no giant female form with a little apron cooking heavenly breakfast at the heavenly, you know, it's not like that at all. It's the quality of consciousness that the word mother creates for us. And so we use a human image in order to have access to that quality of consciousness. Jesus said it directly. After I am gone, I will send you the Comforter. I mean, what is more perfect description of mother than the Comforter? The Father comforts you too, but in the end, the masculine, the father energy says, but you do have to meet the standard. The mother just says, oh, my poor baby, you know, let me comfort you. Like that. I have a memory of being 8 years old when I did something that was really not. No, I was 6. I did something that was really not acceptable in my family. I took something that didn't belong to me and then I lied about it. These are not things in my family that you could do. But before my parents corrected me, which they must have done, although I can't remember the correction. I only remember my mother looking at me and realizing that for me to behave that way, I must have been sorely pressed. And she just put her arms around me like that. And I just remember I sobbed on her shoulder and she just held me, the Comforter. Okay. Now, if we do know that that is the underlying reality, you see, that's the perfect love. And if our lives are truly in the hands of the Comforter, why would we be afraid of anything? We may have to offer what I call the piglet prayer from Winnie the Pooh. In this, one of the stories in Winnie the Pooh, Pooh and Piglet go off on a expedition, which they did from time to time. This children's book, you know. And it was foggy, and they went off on this expedition, and they lost their way. And suddenly they were completely, they didn't know where they were, they didn't know how they were going to get home. Piglet could have used a stronger spine. Piglet tended to fold up in times of trouble. Piglet collapses. Again, this gesture, I mean, in fact, when I was at Ananda during that period of time, partly because I had a striped shirt, but my second name was Piglet. So Piglet, in the little illustration, puts his head down like this, and then he gathers his forces, and he lifts his voice up, and he says, "Help! Help! Help!" And then he collapses. No, it turns out they're 10 feet from their home, and everybody hears them, and they come, and they're rescued. The Piglet prayer is very important to remember, because the Comforter wants to know, the Mother wants to know. And even Jesus said, "Let this cup pass from me." So we don't have to be we don't have to be perfect. But if we build that relationship, and my suggestion to you is you practice when it is easier. You don't wait for the crisis. You practice seeing the hand of God, the hand of the loving Divine Mother behind everything that happens. And then you say, if my life is being guided by a Divine Mother, and if she is holding my hand and taking me home, why would I be afraid? Oh, this is why. I can make a long list of why. But then you have to just keep saying, why would that frighten me? Yes, it may hurt me. Yes, it may be difficult. Yes, I may cry my way all the way through it. But why would I be afraid? And would I want ease and comfort instead of freedom? Master was a diamond. He went all the way through it. You see? Is this easy? No. Is this simple? Yes. And because it's not easy, we think it's complicated. It's like, Mother, where are you taking me? And then when necessary, invoke the piglet prayer, which works extremely well. Help, help, help. And then take the next step. Okay? Let's take another little break. First next step is now going to be out into the foyer. We have a few refreshments out for there. We'll take another 10 minutes, and then we'll take a few questions at the end here, okay?
If I am keeping track correctly, we have about 30 more minutes, yeah. So I would like to just devote this to questions, if you have any, and we can pick up what pieces may have been missed. Okay. Okay. Any questions? Okay, we'll start there. This is primarily because we have online people, and if you speak into the microphone, they can hear you.
Perfect.
Okay.
So I have a question. I guess it's in the vein of karma and reincarnation. So
Good question. Good subject.
Yeah. So broad.
Uh-huh.
I believe you were saying it was Swami earlier. I think perhaps, I don't know if you were lamenting about something, and in that moment, I believe you said he could realize that he could see the past and the future, and that what you were struggling with, perhaps in the moment, is part of the journey. And so, with that said, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. Do you feel as if in this incarnation of ours, we're simply just co-creating it as we go? Or consciously or unconsciously, just creating it as we go, this journey of ours in this lifetime? Or has this lifetime of ours, has it already played out, and we're simply just cognizant of it in the moment?
This is what I call the good old free will question.
Yes.
Okay. Sooner or later, when I give people a microphone, somebody will ask the old free will question. You know, I am extremely well educated in, that sounds different than I mean it. I've had many years of study of the teachings of Yogananda, especially through Kriyananda. It's a particular way of explaining things. In the 50 plus years since I've been doing this, when I started, there were, it was either the cutting edge or the lunatic fringe, whichever you wanted to call it. I prefer to be part of the lunatic fringe. That's more fun for me. But we were way outside of the society as a whole. Time has passed. I live in California. I live in the Bay Area of California. I say not everyone meditates where I live, but those who don't feel very guilty because they don't. They all know they should, which is enormous progress, because more than 50 years ago, they didn't even know it was an option, what to speak of being guilty about it. So as everything has moved into the mainstream more, the way Swami describes it, how society changes, generally a group of people create magnetism. Here's the parade of the culture. People step over here, and gradually society moves over and they start marching through where you are. And so society, when I first became a vegetarian, my family thought I was going to die. And I had to submit my entire diet to a doctor who said I would outlive everyone. Fortunately, that's what he said. But it was so weird and unusual. Now, I was in London, and you just picked up a stone, and there was not just vegetarian, but vegan all over the place. And everybody thought it was natural, because everything keeps shifting. So now the idea of karma and reincarnation is very, very common, but it's not always clearly understood. And it leaves questions like, who's really in charge? What am I really doing? And certain teachings, without being specific about what you said, we try to take a high teaching and bring it into where we're already standing, and especially if it supports certain things that we prefer. And everybody wants to think that I'm in charge. And we really want some simple answer that makes me the force here. And the very idea that the whole idea of me is completely misunderstood. It's not that there's not good intention or even a degree of truth. When you're dealing with a teaching that is, these days people don't think that much about lineage. These are the rantings of an old woman now, so you just have to be patient with me. When I was a youngster, and we had to walk to school uphill both ways, But when all of this first started, and it was, especially in San Francisco, all these gurus coming from India and so on, lineage was a very important concept. Where did this teaching come from?
And who said it, and how did they say it, and what was their right to say it? And there was a tremendous respect for lineage, and people were much more focused on source, on the source. As things got more popular, and this is to the good, but every good thing also has consequences. People become familiar, and they have an insight, and they offer that insight, and if they're clever and have magnetism and have some truth, that insight starts to spread. And if that insight also fits in nicely with other egoic preferences, as actually my friend Anandi also said this, there was this teacher who was very popular for a while, and his teaching was tremendously popular because, as Anandi put it, he said, just keep on doing whatever you're doing, but just call it spiritual. And so thousands of people loved that one. That was a terrific one. Because it wasn't spiritual, it was just self-indulgent, but they called it spiritual, so now we're spiritual. Because a person's looking up from the bottom, they're trying to get out of guilt or whatever it was, it's positive. But when it comes down from the top, you see it a lot more clearly. If you think at all about how much freedom you have to choose what's going to happen in your life, you realize not much is actually the answer. I mean, we're bound by so many preconditions. So you have to really ask yourself, not just on a theoretical basis, how much freedom do I have, but just how much freedom do I have? And the difficulty is, very few of us have the capacity to choose happiness. Because we try to choose happiness, but then all these conflicting forces start coming. So you have to reverse engineer it, not saying what do I want to be true, but what seems to be going on here. And then you can find a teaching like this one, which of course I think is great because I've been part of it a long time, but it's the teaching. It's not the itness of it. This isn't that. We accumulate through the chakras over many incarnations momentum in a certain direction. And so, yes, we created it. Yes, we can unravel it. But the idea that I can just unravel it because I want to is, well, try it, honey, and see how it works for you. That's really the only answer. How is that working for you? I used to get, in my position before, years ago, what I used to call refugees from the New Age. Because they would come, they would find us somehow, and they would come for counseling, and they would explain to me how they'd been trying to heal their cancer, they'd been trying to get a perfect relationship, they'd been trying to make money, they'd been trying to do this, and they weren't successful. And because the teaching they were trying to follow was simply insufficient for the goals that they were trying to achieve. And they'd been told that all they had to do is this, all they had to do is that, and I would just say, well, honey, how's that working for you? And often the confess would be not very well. Well, maybe we need to think this through again from another angle. So we have the free will, so to speak, to choose our influences. But Yogananda put it in the autobiography, thoughts are not individually created. They are vibrations of consciousness that we attune ourselves to and we receive. I mean, think about it. If you're with somebody who's depressed, all the energy, everything in the world supports their being depressed. And if something happens and it lifts them out of the depression, perhaps no circumstances have changed, but all evidence now supports not being depressed, because we've tuned our radio. We are just a radio receiver. We've tuned it to one vibration, we've tuned it to another, we've tuned it to another. Our freedom is what influences we receive. But we don't have absolute free will in the sense that you cannot cut yourself out of the fabric of creation. There was a Buddhist teacher, a woman, and she said she'd always sort of struggled with the ideas of karma. And then she had a big program she was supposed to deliver. She got sick. She couldn't do it. She started thinking about karma. She got sick because she was taking care of her grandbaby. The grandbaby was ill. The baby sneezed in her face multiple times. She caught the baby's illness. How did I happen to be taking care of my grandbaby? Well, because my daughter had got married and she had this baby. Well, how did your daughter come to get married? How did you have a daughter? Oh, well, I had a daughter because my mother wanted me to go to this college, but I wanted to go to that one, and I went to this school, and then I decided to go to the bookstore, and I walked in, and there he was, and we fell in love, and I married him, and we had a baby, and then my daughter, where do you cut it? Where can you just say, oh, I'm just going to create something else? You have all this momentum happening, and you can redirect the ship, and then it's all energy, so that when you open yourself, and instead of just saying, I want, you say, how can I serve? How can I love? How can I be your instrument? How can I be your voice in this world? Then this whole other kind of energy comes into us. We start cooperating with this world that we're in, instead of always trying to make it our own way. So we wake up step by step, but eventually, if we're paying attention, we discover what has always been true, which is, yes, we have a part, but no, we're not completely free, and yes, we're working with God, but no, we're not just making it up, and no, it's not without history. It's not without precedent. Is it predetermined? It gets very goofy when you talk about that. And so, what I mean is, who's to say? Swami Kriyananda has said things that are you just don't know what to make of them. He said, you go into your closet and you pick that particular shirt, and there was no chance that you could have picked any other shirt but that one. And you think, oh dear, But on the other hand, it says, I am a part of all that is. And if I'm enjoying what's happening, I keep going. And if I'm not, I try to find another goal and begin to move toward it. So we become very practical about it. And we pay attention to lineage, which is, why does this person think it's true? And what is their source? And how consistent is this with ancient teachings? Where did this come from? What is the proof of it? And we try little by little. One more little point on that. You can't always evaluate the teacher. Especially now, Swami Kriyananda and his whole group are gone. There used to be a lot more living examples. But what you can do is you can look at the people who have devoted themselves to the practices, and you ask yourself, do I want to be like them? Because that's where you see the fruit of the teaching. Not in every soul who signs on the dotted line, but when you see examples of someone who gives the credit in a certain way, this is the fruit of it. When I met Swami Kriyananda, I was saying this last night, I did not have any relationship with Yogananda. I hadn't even been able to read his book. Able to, meaning I wasn't inspired by it. As soon as I met him, I thought, whatever made him who he was, I want to know what that is. And I didn't have any way of judging Yogananda, except I could see the fruit of his labor. So you also, when you ask a question about a certain teaching, see how it's being acted out. Do you see examples of individuals who inspire you, who are following that way of thinking? Well, if you do, then embrace it. Try it, because that's who you'll become. But then have the humility and the honesty to say, either this isn't working for me, or if it's important to say to you, this isn't working, let's find out what's true. Does that help? Okay, thank you. Another question? Yes. Camille?
I'm not sure if this is one question or two. You talked about Piglet's prayer, saying help, help, help. And you also talked about trusting the Divine Mother to walk us home. And my question is, what is the best way to sincerely ask for help and trust that there is divine comfort and goodwill?
The first step is to realize that you want that, because we think that we're doing all this with our mind, and our thoughts about it are really important, and we set it up. It's not really like that. It's much more on the level of our most authentic, true feelings. It's not what we're telling ourselves, it's who we actually are. So the first step toward being in tune with a higher presence is to really rest in your own heart. Just really rest in who I really am, not who I'm trying to be, not the face I'm trying to give to the world, but who I really am in myself. And the more deeply you rest in your own heart, the easier it is then. And I don't mean this is separate from your mind, but what I'm trying to say is the words and the thoughts don't matter, it's the vibration. You know, am I really pretending that I'm all okay and that I can manage all this myself? Or is the piglet prayer the real spontaneous sound that's coming out of my heart? I really need help here. And then we have to start paying attention, and even just paying attention, looking backwards. Like, how many times have things just worked out? You know, or if I would often say when someone was telling me a big problem that they had, I used to do a lot of counseling, I would say, don't worry, something will happen. And they would hear that to say is that this is going to work out. No, I didn't say that it would work out. I just said something will happen, because something always happens. You know, the next thing always happens. But if we start just paying attention, that something always happens. We begin to realize that even though we think we're driving the boat, it's really on the track. And the track is not outside of our control, but it's the momentum that we've already set in motion. So the first thing we have to do to have that relationship is just start having an internal conversation. Oh, how very interesting. Look how one thing has led to another. Isn't this very interesting? I thought that I wanted this to have happen. I didn't know how to make it happen. And look, now a year has passed and here I am. You know, or something else has happened. But you make a friend. You just really begin to realize that Divine Mother is my friend, or however you think of it, your guru, your guardian angel. The words are so unimportant, but that I'm not alone. And start consciously, in every possible way, cultivating a sense that I'm not alone, that I have an inner friend with me all the time. One of my friends who was a good businessman, he had a chair in his office, and he put the chair in a slightly inconvenient spot so nobody who ever came in sat in it, and Jesus sat in that chair. And when he would be having meetings, he would kind of just glance over to the chair, and he would just kind of ask Jesus what he wanted to do about this particular problem. And because Jesus was always there, another woman who was working in a place where she couldn't put out any visible signs, she put a picture of her guru, in this case Yogananda, inside her desk drawer, and she just leave the desk drawer a little bit open. And you can tuck a picture of Master in your pocket, or just, you know, right here under your dress. Sometimes when I've had really hard things to do, I've taken a little picture of Babaji or Swamiji, and, you know, I'll just be in the middle of something. You just kind of put your hand on your heart, and all of a sudden, you're in relationship. When we used to wear those rings, one of those rings was a Jupiter stone. It stood for the Guru. And I would often, you know, just kind of like put my hand on the Jupiter stone. So I was constantly turning my attention by deliberate methods. You can wear a mala. You know, you just have it. You just kind of put your hand on your mala, like that. In other words, you begin to focus energy in that direction. See, here's the thing about it. Sometimes the teaching is to imagine something wonderful. You visualize. There's a beautiful beach, and the beach is open, and then I'm walking on the beach in a diaphanous dress, and I feel the warm wind, and then the unicorn comes, and I get on the back of the unicorn, and we go galloping on the beach. And that can be very good, because it can relax you, it can expand your imagination, but it's imaginary. Okay, there is no unicorn. The feeling can be true, but there's no unicorn. The relationship with the divine is real. It's really there, and there is a real, actual, conscious, independent force that's going to come to you. So you make friends with that as you would with anybody in the world. If you wanted to make a friend, if you meet somebody in this room and you like them, and you think, why don't we go have coffee together? Why don't we talk each other? I'll tell you my story, you tell me yours. You know, feel that way with Divine Mother. Oh, we're going to go have coffee now. We're going to go do this. We're going to go meet a new friend. We're going to go shopping. Isn't this a pretty blue dress? Don't you like it, Mother? Just as you would for your best friend. And then there you will find there is a response. And you'll begin to realize that I'm starting this as an affirmation, but it's actually a relationship. Okay? Anyone else? Yes.
I can't believe I'm actually asking this question right now. Okay. Is that good? I'm trying to formulate this question right now in my head because it's the reason I'm here.
Okay.
I started hearing Swamiji in my head.
Okay.
And I have a bit of history with him. But so I'm formulating this question as I'm actually saying it, kind of. I'm thinking, what does that voice sound like to you in your head? Because you said a number of times that he speaks to you. And I'm kind of curious as to how that appears to you, whether as intuition or do you actually hear his voice? Do you see him in your mind, or how does that work?
I could answer that question. I'm going to tell you a funny story first, and then I'll answer you more seriously. This is also very serious, but it's just amusing when you ask, what does that voice sound like? When I was about 18, 19, I was just starting on all this, just beginning to understand, and I have a very, very quick temper, and I'm not temper, but temperament. I do things fast, and I'm often, especially I used to, I didn't really live in the now. I was always thinking about the next thing. The first real spiritual experience I had, it was, I was washing dishes in my house, and I was washing the dishes, but I wasn't paying attention. I was thinking about what I was going to do next. And I actually heard a voice. This was before I met Swami, so this is not an answer yet. I heard a voice in my head that I believe was the voice of God. The voice sounded like a merchant in New York City, and the voice said inside my head, "What's your hurry, honey? It's just one damn thing after another." It was like that. But I got it. And that's really just actually been a principle of my life. I find myself moving out of the now, trying to move into the future. And what do I think is going to happen in the future? It's just going to be one damn thing after another. And so God talked to me straight up like that. However, speaking of Swami Kriyananda, that's actually very interesting because for the first 16 years of my spiritual life, I essentially lived next door to Swamiji, and for much of that time, I saw him every day. And then I was, by his request, I moved a couple of 100 miles away, was often very much in touch with him by email and by telephone. He was very active then. He often came and stayed in our house, and so I saw him regularly. I traveled with him, but it wasn't the same as every day. During those months, those years, those beginning years, we were establishing essentially what Ananda has here in Portland. We were establishing that same thing in Palo Alto, getting a temple, getting a community. We started a school. Lots of different things happened. And somehow, I just kept doing this. We all kept doing it. We just kept moving forward. And it just went like a seamless whole. And when we had the community and we invited Swamiji down, and he came and he did a dedication ceremony. This would have been 1990. And he was sitting like there, and I was on a microphone like here, and we had like 300 people. Everybody came. It was a big event, big like this. And I'm starting to talk about how we got to this point. And I just had this sudden feeling come over me that I had nothing to do with this. It was this energy behind me that had made it happen. And I was embarrassed to be standing in front of him, and I actually backed up like this because I just couldn't have my back to him. And I became aware, and that was the beginning, because now I was physically away. I became aware of the fact that somehow or another there was a link in our energy, and that the fact that we had just moved without hardly a pause to make things happen, because we were always in tune with his vibration, and I actually think his actual consciousness. And he said many years later, he used the phrase, "I'm always in touch with you in my consciousness, and I project energy to you, and if you are receptive to it and in tune with it," he said, "then you will take it in as your own, and you will make it your own." So it wasn't like I was actually thinking, that Kriyananda was making these decisions. I felt like I was making those decisions, and I was, but I was making them as part of the choir. That would be exactly how you would say it. There was a strong singer right here, so my voice was really right on the notes. But if I'd been out there by myself, God knows what I would have been singing. But there was this constant sound, but it wasn't intellectual. It wasn't like that at that time. It was just this energy flowing through, and it had a certain feeling to it. And oddly enough, I didn't identify it until a year or two afterwards. But once I identified it, I've been able to look for it. And I've been able to tell the difference, not always perfectly, but I can tell the difference between when the energy is coming from him and when I'm just making it up. And naturally now, it's just like being in the choir. If somebody's singing the right note in your ear all the time, gradually your own voice will start hitting that note on its own, even when you're alone, because you'll begin to be able to know what it's like. So that's been my relationship with him. For many years, I was able to confirm my intuitions because I was able to check it with him. When I wrote the first book about him, Swami Kriyananda, as we have known him, no one had ever written a book like that. And I gathered all these stories from people, and I wrote it up. And many times I drew conclusions about Swami's intention, about their lesson, lots of things. And I'd never published a book, and I was writing it because he asked me to. He was in India by then, so it would have been 2005, I think, or 6. And I went over there to finish it. I needed his help. I sat down next to him. He sat next to me. He read every page of it like this. Now, bear in mind, there was a 20-year history where most of what I wrote he threw away. But that's a whole different story. He was teaching me. So I was perfectly prepared for him to rewrite this manuscript. But he just read and turned page after page, like this. And it was saying to me, you know what you're doing. The intuitions that you're having now about things, we've connected. Not infallibly, I wouldn't want to overstate that, but it can happen. And then there's just a flow. There's kind of a self-forgetful flow that just like, it's just the energy. This is the obvious energy. There's no question about it. Now, occasionally and very rarely, I'll have a dream, but I can't think of a time where I ever got like words in a dream or anything like that. But often, when I first wake up in the morning, an idea will be in my head, a solution, a possibility. Sometimes it's a problem solved. Sometimes it's just an idea. It just pops into my head as I wake up. I've become very convinced that that's when Swami can talk to me. After a whole night of just suppressing my conscious mind, the subconscious and the superconscious are actually right next to each other. And when the conscious mind, if you think of a Y, a capital Y, like a printed Y, lying on its side, and the conscious mind is the stem, and we pull back from the conscious level when we meditate. We pull back from the conscious level when we go to sleep. We turn off the senses, we don't eat, we don't drink, we don't watch, we don't listen. We pull back, and you come to this juncture. When you're meditating, if you put out a lot of energy, you go up in meditation. If you put out less and less energy, you go down into subconsciousness. But all three of the levels are right next to each other. So very often when you're coming out of subconsciousness, before you get into wakefulness, superconscious can touch you. So I've found a lot, right when I first wake up, I feel like without my remembering it, Swamiji was talking to me and then he told me. The only time it was really different than that was when I was writing Light Bearer. When I was writing Light Bearer, I was in total seclusion. I was not distracted by anything. It was the book he had wanted me to write. It was my life's work. And when I finished that book, I said, if I get cancer now, no chemo for me. I'm just going to die. I'm done. I've done what I came to do. I'm not expecting to get cancer, but I was ready. I'm finished. When I was writing that book, Swami really talked to me. But I still didn't hear a voice, but I could feel his thoughts. And one particular time, I just wrote this sentence, a single sentence, and it was terrible writing, that sentence. But it had some nice images in it, but it didn't really mean anything. It just sounded kind of vaguely spiritual. And for some reason, I was totally attached to it. And like for 2 days, Swami kept telling me, Asha, that is such a terrible sentence, take it out of the book. And it became a conversation. Like, but I like it, it almost means something. It doesn't mean anything, Asha, just take it out of the book. And pretty soon we were just laughing like we would in person. I can't say that I heard his voice, I can't say that I saw his face, but that was the conversation. And there was another time in that book, these are just two of many examples, I had a quote from him that didn't quite make sense. And I knew it was important. I couldn't quite get it. And then I just heard, add that last word. That was the intention. I knew I had understood it when he said it. But you see, a lot of communication is intuitive in person. So you write down the words, but you don't necessarily get the whole meaning because you got the meaning by intuition. So I needed that last word, and he told me finally. I kept saying, sir, I know I need to put this in. I could feel you want it in, but look, it's not complete. And then the word came. So it happens like that too. Now, everybody is different. Everybody is different. What you have to do is you have to experiment. Do not ever dogmatize. Swami said this is what I'm supposed to do. He would never have treated you like that. If he were with us, he would have suggested it and waited to see what you did. It might have been the first step, and then you had to learn something after. So you have to be very humble about it. And then you have to be very honest about it. Well, it seemed like a good idea, but I must have misunderstood. Or next time it has to be more clear. But it's the most important thing you can do is to be in tune with a wiser reality than the one we have right now. So what did they say? How do you get good judgment? By experience. How do you get experience? By bad judgment. And so that's how you have to work with intuition. If you dogmatize it and claim it, by that very act you have betrayed it. Because intuition is very, very subtle. And true intuition makes you humble, not arrogant about it. Okay, does that help? I've run out of time. Oh my goodness. Badri, why don't we just end with a short chant, because I would rather end. Okay, Michael, whoever. Thank you all very much for sharing the morning. Yeah. It's not only a joy for me to be able to pass on to you what Swamiji so generously gave to me, but also it helps me to hear these thoughts again and again. And so we're all in this together. We have not only the blessing of great teaching, but we also have great family. And it's always a joy to be with my brothers and sisters. So thank you so much for being here. Okay, Michael.
Since we'll end with a chant, which will be lovely, I just wanted to say thank you all for coming. And we have an event at our community this evening, which everybody is welcome to come to. We call it Guru Night, and we will be doing a little mini pilgrimage to shrines for the gurus. And it will be from 6 o'clock, starts at 6, until 9. So it'll get chilly. If you come, we're going to be all outside. So bring your sweaters. And then tomorrow morning we have service here. So at 9:30 we have a purification and fire ceremony, and at 10 o'clock is our regular service, which Asha will be speaking at. She will also be at Guru Night tonight. It's a community event, and she's a guest, so it won't be all Asha, but Asha will be there with us tonight as well. If you have any questions, of course, ask, and we can give you the address and all of the community if you need to have that. But thank you again. It's been lovely to share this time with you.
How shall I love thee, Lord my God, with every breath I breathe? How shall I love thee, Lord my God, with every breath I breathe? Just as a fire may burn a whole forest, burn to the root my desires. Just as a fire may burn a whole forest, burn to the root my desires. How shall I seek thee, Lord my God, with every breath I breathe? Seek thee, Lord my God, with every breath I breathe. Just as a fire may burn a whole forest, burn to the root my desires. Just as a fire may burn a whole forest, burn to the root my desires. How shall I serve thee, Lord my God, with every breath I breathe? How shall I serve thee, Lord my God, with every breath I breathe? Just as a fire may burn a whole forest, burn to the root my desire. Just as a fire may burn a whole forest, burn to the root my desires. How shall I worship thee, Lord my God, with every breath I breathe? How shall I worship thee, Lord my God, with every breath I breathe? Just as a fire may burn a whole forest, burn to the root my desires. Just as a fire may burn a whole forest, burn to the root my desires. How shall I love thee, Lord my God, with every breath I breathe? How shall I love thee, Lord my God, with every breath I breathe? How shall I love thee, Lord my God, with every breath I breathe? With every breath I breathe.
Why don't we close as we begin? Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, Friend and Guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Bless us. Fill our hearts with your loving presence. Make us your instruments. Keep us steadfast in our determination to live in the light. Om. Peace. Amen. If you had questions or something you'd like to ask that you didn't get to ask, I have nothing else to do. I'll just hang out. Oh, and I can also, if you want a book, I can sign the book too. Okay.